percent turnout of British citizens in Britain who voted, and in effect, 37% voted to leave. It's hardly an overwhelming mandate, but it indicates a sense of the division in Britain. And I think that division reflects very much the stupidity of a referendum on a very complex subject. And not only the stupidity, but the divisiveness of the issue in terms of class, in terms of the growth of insecurity and the growth of austerity with the government. So the government was asking for Remain when they were pursuing policies of austerity, which were increasing the insecurities. This is relevant for our later discussion because it's happening in other parts of Europe. If you have your citizenry becoming more and more insecure and feeling aggrieved, then the government says, vote for us for Remain. Don't be surprised if a large number of them revolt against that. I think we also have a terrible situation because David Cameron, the Prime Minister at the time, has said recently that he doesn't regret calling the referendum, he regrets the outcome. That seems to me an exercise in semantics that I don't appreciate. We don't have a tradition in British democracy of a referenda. We're a representative democracy. We believe in Edmund Burke's principle. We elect people to represent us even if we may not agree with them. And I think we're in danger of repeating some of these errors that has taken place in Brexit today. And there's one other issue I'd like to mention at the beginning because it affects every single democracy today, which is that we're seeing a corruption of democracy dominated by plutocratic donors and owners of the media who can manipulate opinion. This is an unprecedented situation, which is incredibly powerful. We know in Britain that the Brexit vote was influenced by Cambridge Analytica using all sorts of trickery, and very big plutocratic money went into the Brexit campaign. Ironically, many of the leaders of that Brexit campaign are now rushing to leave Britain. The richest man in Britain has promptly gone off to live in Monaco, a tax haven, because he doesn't want to pay British taxes. Big company, Ratcliffe. He's just been knighted, and then he rushes off and he moves to a tax haven, openly saying it. The same with Dyson, the most dramatic entrepreneur who led in the Brexit thing. He's now moving his company to Singapore. Very, very interesting choice of place, a tax haven. He says it's got nothing to do with Brexit, but it's very strange. And one of the titles that's being used to describe the prospect of Brexit in Britain is Singapore on Thames, which is rather appropriate given what he's done. But we have a whole string of people rushing to take out residency in France, like Nigel Lawson and Nigel Farage, making sure that his children have German passports and so on. So we have a very split situation, and I think the bitterness in Britain is going to last for a very long time, whatever happens, whether we have a second vote, which is the route I prefer, or we have the May's deal, which is very controversial, but a lot of the no-deal people are desperate to clamber onto that, or some other compromise. We're going to have a bitterness that stretches for decades, I believe.
Jules.
So I confess I looked at this slightly differently. So when I was thinking about Europe after Brexit, whilst there's a huge amount I don't know, I was thinking, well, Europe after Brexit, let's imagine that there is less uncertainty. And so for me, seeing this from London, I can see two trends that come with less uncertainty. The first is, I think, a really large resurgence of human relationships that have found uncertainty to be quite a blocker. Now, I mean, there has been a really large amount of pragmatism beneath the politics, that I have seen in my daily engagements with entrepreneurs from across the continent, particularly our digital entrepreneurs, for whom many issues are global, not regional anyway. But for each chink of clarity that I think we get, I think we'll see that pragmatic energy grow. And the reason I say that is I think it reflects the many interdependencies that we have. And this is not to underestimate the importance of frameworks that go with it, but the interdependencies that we have in terms of finance, talent, tech, across our European continental ecosystem are really significant. I mean, we are a powerful ecosystem of powerful cities. And actually, the report that came out on Monday at the start of Davos that had the 10 most powerful cities in the world, and 4 of them are European. London remains a city that attracts more FDI projects than any other city in the world. We see so much city-to-city collaboration that I and others are working incredibly hard to promote. But I think our entrepreneurs have been itching for certainty and clarity. And I've actually been quite struck by the levels of confidence that there will be ways through. So I take quite reassurance in that level of pragmatism that when uncertainty starts to reduce, we will start to see that collaboration come through from the factors that pull us together. The second thing that I think will be positive from a reduction in uncertainty is to all the energy, effort, brainpower that has gone into this issue, particularly on the UK side, but actually across European countries, has been significant at a time when, again, sitting in Davos, you have a time to lift your heads up and think about the fourth industrial revolution, the shared opportunities, but goodness, shared challenges, much of which I think is integral into why these issues are facing us from Brexit in the first place. But there are so many shared values that we have that I think for many people, actually, there was a lot that we took for granted that perhaps we now appreciate a little bit more. But when we talk about our shared liberal values, our shared diversity as a European continent, the importance we put around equality, these are things that when we talk about the future of AI and ethics, Europe needs to be firing on all cylinders right now. It's really important that our voice is heard at the global table. And so for me, the reduction of uncertainty, the reduction of finance going into contingency planning, but actually being put into issues where we all really need to be fighting together when we share so much, that for me is something that I look forward to.
Martin.
Okay, nobody said anything I disagree with, so it was perhaps a bit disappointing, but it means I don't need to go over the history of the referendum which Guy went through very well, and some of the characters involved, whom he described pretty accurately, well, I thought you were rather restrained, actually. the London and the cities. I've been a Londoner, as it were, all my life. I recently wrote about that, so I can put that to one side. So let's focus on this. The first, I want to divide my discussion into what it means for the UK and what it means for Europe, and I'll try and cover it very, very quickly, so it'll be very terse, and there will be lots of points I can't elaborate. So the first point is the uncertainty will not be removed on March the 29th.
Not then.
It depends on the path we then follow, but in many respects, the uncertainty is bound to remain for years, if not decades afterwards, and I will explain why, and I will go through the different paths. So first of all, we don't know what Parliament will, or whether Parliament will agree on anything, and therefore we don't know what will happen on March the 29th in the following respects. We don't know whether the Prime Minister's deal will ultimately be passed. I think that's still quite possible, and it's clear that the Brexiters are moving in that direction, as she expected. So the chances of that are significant. It is quite possible that no deal will be reached by Parliament, and then in theory we crash out. I'll come to that thing. And it is also possible that Parliament will agree and seek and gain an extension to the Article 50 vote, a number of European politicians to the Article 50, exit possibly or probably in order to have a second referendum. These are all possible outcomes. And they all obviously have completely different implications for subsequent uncertainty. If the Prime Minister deal goes through, the uncertainty is in a sense least, but all we've decided is the withdrawal. We have not decided, and indeed have not begun to negotiate quite deliberately, the post-Brexit trade deal. It's clear that that will be very difficult. The Brexiters will want to go back to Canada, and Canada is incompatible. The Canada Free Trade Area is incompatible with the Northern Ireland backstop, the Irish backstop. We don't know how that will be resolved. If we have a change of government, which is possible, it is very likely that what the Labour Party would pursue in government will be a very different trade deal from what the Conservative Party would see. So there is total uncertainty, even with the Prime Minister's deal, about the subsequent trade relations of the UK with the EU and the rest of the world. Not trivial. And it could take years to resolve those. I won't go through the timetable is granted, is currently only a couple of years, but it could be extended. If there is no deal, nothing is resolved because no deal is meaningless. There will be a huge number of deals that would have to be agreed after no deal on almost everything, including how we treat Ireland, how our aviation works, important regulatory areas which are important for UK and Europe. I can't go through all of them. So we would immediately start negotiating a whole lot of new things in a completely different environment, which would be a mess. That is clear. And our future trading policy outside in this no-deal world will be also completely uncertain because we would have to re-establish WTO membership and a whole lot of other things which will be very, very complicated. And of course, if we have another referendum, nobody knows what will happen in that referendum. It could be any one of the possible outcomes, nor even what will be on the table of this referendum. So the important point to understand, we have consigned ourselves to a multi-year mess, which, in my view, and this is where I part company with my colleague on my right, will create enormous ongoing costs for the UK and its trading partners, and the only description for this process is one of insane psychodrama. So but this important thing is there is no post-Brexit EU because we're nowhere near the post-Brexit world. The insouciance of the British elite in holding this referendum and having it carried through in those conditions is astounding. So that's us. So what does it mean for Europe? Well, the uncertainty will be costly for Europe because uncertainty is costly for Europe. In general, I take the view, since the EU is 6 times as big as the UK, its trade relations, its breakdown of its trade relations, this is very rough and ready, in all dimensions will be on average a 1/6 as big but it will be as big across the whole EU as it will be for the UK. Pretty well, not quite, because there are much more alternatives and there are less, so make that. But of course, per head, it'll be much, much smaller. I do think that Britain's exit will change the EU in important ways, and I'd just like to find, apart from the uncertainties and so forth, some positive and some negative. The positive way are twofold. It's made clear that exit is really quite costly. That's quite encouraging. And two, because it's made clear that exit is quite costly, it has pushed the whole EU together. So my favourite joke is that the great nightmare, and I know it should stop now, the great nightmare of Britain throughout history is that it should have a united Europe. And Britain, with Brexit, has united Europe against it. The other point, though, is its economic culture will change somewhat in a less liberal direction. Guy might like that, but I think will be an important development. And of course, it will be smaller, and it will be seen in some parts of the world that a quite significant country has left, a country which is particularly visible because of its language and history, and they will say, well, if the British really think the EU is dying, maybe there's something in that. So all round, a complete, total, comprehensive disaster from which nobody important will gain, except, in my view, Mr. Putin.
Okay. Thank you. There's a lot to think about there and unpack. I'm just conscious of time, and we do want to answer some of your questions. So as you were all talking there, I was thinking about various elements. I want to talk about, and actually one of the guests in the audience has brought this up with a question on Slido. If we're looking ahead to what life is like after Brexit, given the fact that we've got years and years of uncertainty and everything else and all the questions we can't answer, can we talk about what this means for the future of the labour market? So this question, what are the potential consequences